Hey everyone, thank you for coming. I'm Simon. I'm gonna try to make it through this. It's gonna be a bit of an experiment for us all. See if I can get through this because I never have time to go through the entire document. And then last night I started tweaking stuff, and I was like, I shouldn't have done that. And I just undid a couple of steps, and then I don't know where it ended up. So it'll be a little bit of a surprise. But yeah, I work at a company called Panoply. We're going to get to that in a bit, but for the last 8 years prior to that, I was working at a company called Members Machine. So I'm going to quickly just go back and look at one project. I'm just going to show it because it kind of shows the type of work that I do a lot and that we do, which is kind of abstract effects type of thing. So this is for Logitech. It's called PowerPlay. Let's play it. Anyway, I'm just going to skip through that. So thank you. This was kind of stuff is, it's quite abstract and it doesn't seem like it has a lot of purpose when you pull a frame out of it like this, but this is what we tend to do quite a lot. We try to abstract the message and then create beautiful art from it that conveys the message. So this was a mouse pad that charges your mouse as you are playing games. Basically, that's kind of the story there. Developed this tunnel as well. This was all when I don't remember what version, but it was when the Boolean came out. Then they replaced the cookie SOP and just went mad with it and modeled all these little assets and then built a little tunnel from it. In the film, it's kind of like more like that. But yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm now a partner at Panoply, which is kind of in a way, it's a very similar deal to ManV. It's just we're a smaller studio. We scale when we need to. We're based in London, and I'm going to show one project that we did that was done before I joined, and then a new project that we just launched 2 days ago. So, and then I'll get into the meat of the presentation. Okay. And then quickly you can turn it off again. Keep the light down. And then quickly, the next, I just want to get through this quickly because it's a lot here. So this is a new project. It's called Tide. It's about the cyclical nature of life, how we all form from complexity and then we die and become part of Earth again. So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit more about that later. So let's just go through this quickly. So no applause. So yeah, R&D. This is the section where like everything just goes mad. So This is the part that I tried to tweak last night, and I undid a bunch of steps. So I don't no idea which state it's in. But this is a collection of a bunch of tests from years using Houdini that I've been using it for just like 4 or 5 years. I don't know. It's a bunch of stuff. I tend to do a lot of this darker tone stuff when I have the choice, because I like the high contrast and the super detail, but also always maintaining like primary and secondary detail and distributing that detail in a way that it feels meaningful. So these are all experiments from a Flyknit job. So it's all this line-based structures that was done a few years ago. I have some moving tests in here as well, a bunch of greebles. I'm going through this fast because I have a lot of stuff, and instead of cleaning it up, I just rush through it and just keep it in and add to it over time. So for those of you who've seen this before, I do apologize. Some reoccurring, but you know, you get a vibe. It's more of a mood board. Here we have some more motion-related stuff. This is from another Logitech piece as well that was done at ManV. Did a lot of these particle evection stuff, which is so beautiful, nice to play with. But also a lot of abstract. I mean, as if the other stuff wasn't abstract, but like a lot of less recognizable things. Let's say it that way. Just building little solvers and stuff. This is basically just diffusion and then like averaging neighbors, and it can almost create this cloth sim, various volume growth things, and it's simple. It's fairly simple stuff, really. It's just like simple vectors pushing things around or pointing away from stuff. This was the first thing I built in Houdini, more or less. This was for a Flyknit job as well, called Hypervenom a few years ago. Which is quite successful, and it works because you have, again, the super detail, but you have the primary and secondary details in the so like I'd like to look at everything from a design sense and make sure that it has all of those different parts. And these are just other systems built with the same sort of core, I would say. Affecting volumes along splines. And again, I'm a mess right now, so I do apologize. There's a lot of all over the place, and we're going to go into some more focused stuff in a minute. I just wanted to show you some of this stuff anyway, because it's kind of what I play around with a lot. And this is funny. I had to do it. This was when Vellum came. I had to try it, so enjoy this one. We tried out the new Threadrippers when they came out, and I think this whole thing simulated on a 16-core machine in like an hour and a half, and then rendered like 2 hours on Redshift on our farm. So it's pretty beautiful. I like it. Yeah, I mean, what's not to like? I mean, I'm a bit tired of soft bodies and stuff like that, but I think this is quite timeless. It's good. Beautiful, right? Very impressed with that, and it's looping too, so I can put that. And so this was some R&D for the Logitech film we showed in the beginning. It was all about charging, so like collecting things into a center point. Also tried to visualize the magnetic fields, because it's obviously a wireless mouse, so it did some experiments with this. This didn't make it into the film. I think it's a shame, because I think it looks really nice. And all of these little things here were modeled with booleans as well. I'm going to cover that technique a bit later. Then I always try to make fractals out of everything. So this is the mouse itself, the CAD data. I just folded it in on itself, different ways to try forward and like some sci-fi art from it. Pretty cool. In the end, we ended up using the CAD data to kind of grow it like this to represent the charging process. Anyway, so much stuff here. I need to go through this. How are we on time? Sorry, I just want to make sure. Are we okay? Oh, okay, we have plenty of time. Maybe I should slow down. We might not make it to the end, but yeah. Obsessed a bit over this stuff in the beginning as well, subdividing meshes and blending shapes and different ways. Pretty cool stuff. Thank you, Moritz. Thank you very much. Been working a lot on Nike projects over at Manby as well, so this was for one of them. This is actually not grains, we did with like the liquid, what's it called, fluids, or flip, sorry. Yeah, and this was a funny one as well. We did, I found this by mistake by averaging points, rotate and like pushing away from each other. Then it became really popular after that, but I'm not saying I invented this, but I found it on my own by mistake, and it was kind of a fun thing. And here was another, was doing a lot of like disinfection systems, and this one I tried to alter the UV coordinates. So all these ripples are actually not changed in the mesh, it's just the UVs being moved around. And then, yeah, we found a use for this as well for one of the jobs we did for Maxon a couple of years ago. Kind of a funny one. Took all these scans of animals and blew up their intestines, which is interesting. Adding some bubbles in there as well to mix it up, get some nice refractions. Okay, maybe I should speed up. I don't know. I'm a bit worried. I have like 400 slides or something, so. You just keep growing every time. I'm like, yeah, I can fit that in 45 minutes, no problem. All this coral stuff. This was also quite fun, and I always like this kind of building these growing structures that has where you kind of set up some rules and you build some DNA essentially and let it form itself. And this one was something I obsessed over for a while during that Maxon job too, because we had like a crab that needed an environment, so I was like building some stuff for that. And that was fun, but it ends up being quite heavy when you do deal with a lot of geometry like that and you're not instancing stuff. We also did a job for Apple, which was for the iMac Pro, where we did a lot of procedural buildings, experimented with instancing high-res assets onto surfaces, but in the end we kind of like just did little building, and all of these actually have the same detail. So this is what makes up the entire screen here in the end of it too. Some more slides. Sorry about the mess here. Okay, cool. So back to Panoply work. So this is one of the first things we worked on directly after FMX last year, I think. We started this project, and it was for a Chinese phone company called Oppo. And it was for the World Cup, and they had like this other film with this other for this other phone with Neymar going to a Martian football league. It was weird, but it was kind of fun. So we had this sci-fi setting, and we had to match their style, but roughly. But they didn't actually give us any. They didn't finish their film on time until after we delivered. So it was kind of a little bit back and forth, and they ended up matching a lot of what we did too, I think. But the phone looked like this. It had this. I just pulled this off YouTube, but like it has this weird pattern on the back that only shows up in certain angles. I don't know how to explain it, but you see it for yourself. So it was kind of like a bit of a shader challenge, and it has this coating on top, this glass coat on top, so try to build shaders for that. But we mocked up a little storyboard, so this was kind of our thinking, because the target audience was teenage girls in Asia. So, but it was this really, all the mood boards was like guns and spaceships and dark, and so we were like, okay, how can we do this? So we thought that maybe we can contrast the phone to its environment. So it's from this dark chamber underground on Mars, and it's like being grown underground from these machines, and then it frees itself from the cables and all the darkness of that environment, and it starts to float up through this light in the top. And as it's doing that, the cables are kind of mimicking the movement of the phone, and it comes out into this arena type space, which is an homage to the just the football thing. So that was kind of the plan. We had very little time. It was just me and another guy working on it. So we started developing some tools. So this was one that we call PolyNinja, that basically goes in and finds polygons and then slices it based on the longest edge. And this was good to kind of create irregular forms. So we took like really basic shapes like this, and we ran it on it, and it gives you a nice breakup. And then we built another tool that went in and detailed this up based on the edges, so it's kind of like trying to automate the modeling process. And believe it or not, we built both of these tools in like 2.5 days, and we ended up using them all over the place in the film. And we took that approach because we didn't have much time, and we needed to be able to go from a blockout to the finished asset really quickly. So this is what the kind of top roof panel looks like for that space, and we didn't bother about UVs. We just used triplanar maps and like curvature and stuff like that, and rendered it in Redshift. We also did some organic elements because we wanted it to kind of be this mix of man-made and like natural resources as the power source to grow this phone underground. So this is kind of like an early test. I also like the idea of having really misty atmospherics and stuff. And it bleeds a lot of color into the environment, which otherwise would be quite black. So this is the final environment for the chamber. And another client selling thing was like, put it in diamond dust, which is just a nice way of saying sand. And it kind of spoke to the female aesthetic, which is not that. And then because we had this blue environment, I was like, okay, so let's contrast that because we wanted to show how big the screen was, so we put this kind of like really opposite color spectrum for the screen with all these lights coming on in buildings, because it made it feel more like, it's grounded at Earth and it's for, humans. So yeah, and here's the phone kind of lifting up and some details of it. And this is the camera supposed to be, just kind of like loosely true. And then they had a few different colorways. So we had it like just before it comes up, we kind of had it spinning around and then switching color when the back was faced. And then this is the arena type with like this football pattern light fixture on top. So I'm gonna play it. So now we can dim the lights. Very sci-fi. No idea if this was successful for them or not, but anyway, there's some shaders, shader tests that we did early on. I need to pick up speed again. I feel stressed again. So this is some of the early simulations. We tried to be smart about how we did it because we didn't have time. So this was, I did this, just animated everything in Houdini as well. Then did some camera work and then tried to edit them together. Just tried to make some weird cameras with it to show the rise, and then did a little cut to start to feel it out, if that would work. In the end, we didn't use that. This was one of the first shots we finished, which demonstrates the different color schemes, and it's just before it rises up on the top there. And you can see that paneling in the background and everything. No, speed up, speed up, speed up. So this is the particle sim we did for all the lift up, so it's just the vectored points. We basically we reused this one everywhere. We just like made it less dense and then moved it around and instanced it and tried to be quick about it. Here's some of the organic and non-organic environment things combined. So this was an early iteration of the shot, and then we added more atmospherics. So that was a lot of atmospherics and started feeling way too much. So dial it back a bit. So this is kind of where we ended up. And here's the top shot with some Atmos as well. Super helpful doing like multi-pass AOVs per light for this one to kind of control all the densities of the volumetrics in the environment from the individual lights. So yeah, this was some development on the actual screen content. And then we built a bunch of rocks, instanced them around this from the viewport. And there's no displacement or anything here. It's just instance geometry. So you have quite a lot of detail from that. We already seen it, so I'm not playing it again. So let's make some noise. So I'm with this, I actually mean noise. So this is I've been playing around. So this is quite like rough, and this recording is probably quite dry, so I might skip through it. But like I started using COPS, which is the compositing context of Houdini, quite a lot recently. And I've been experimenting with it, and it's quite useful for building shaders. Here I'm just feeding it into a height field network. So you can kind of use it as a substance designer replacement with the added benefit that it connects directly into the rest of Houdini. So you can reach out into 3D space and sample the environment and have that drive your parameters. And then this can then directly be linked to your shaders. So I've been obsessing over this a bit lately. So yeah, so just by taking various noises, like you can see here, you can clamp them and combine them to form these faceted and layered effects, which is quite cool. So in this example here, we have all these noises that are being combined using max and averaging or addition. Simple, very simple things inside of OpCops. And now we're taking that very same thing, but we're moving it into 3D space. So on the right, you see my 3D node graph. So I took the Swan Donkey, and it's very appropriate that everyone has that Swan Donkey t-shirt now, so that's cool. So it's one favorite primitive. So I built this thing that just moves it into UV space first. So this is just translates it like that so that the coordinate space of the 3D mesh is shared with the coordinate space of the COP network, and this is key because then you can read out the rest position and then sample your 3D environment from there, which is pretty cool. So now we have a direct link from a pixel on the texture into 3D space, and you will be able to sample your environment and pixel and color things that way, which is really cool, I think. But you know. It's got my brain spinning anyway. So here we have like an asset called a flow factor, which is one of mine that basically just creates a fall off over a mesh, and it also gives you a flow, so a vector that shows. But yeah, so here, for example, we're just reading the 3D position of the pixels into color. So that's what it would look like on the UV map. And come on, speed up, dude. I recorded this too slowly. And then here's like a normal path. So you could start doing pretty weird things where you do blend shapes on 3D position passes in like a 2D effect where you can blur them. Here you see the UV islands. You can start to isolate different areas and treat them differently if you wanted to. Or it's like the sky is the limit. You know, all the math and everything you do on SOP level applies to this too. So it's pretty cool. There's the 3D position again. So if you had another object with a 3D position, you could do a blend shape directly on the texture if you wanted to, and blur them and sharpen them and do weird things on like you would do in a compositor if you wanted to. And I don't know why I skipped that because I was dumb. Here's like a dot product thing, which basically checks the normal direction and compares it to the angle of this null, so you can kind of mask stuff. And this is a good example of how you can interact with the 3D environment. And it's almost shader level control that then is standalone from whatever renderer you use, because this can be linked into any shader. So just as an example, I took some of those noises, and then here's like it's an ugly example, I get that, but it's, you know, whatever. And then here's the null driving it. So this is just displacement textures, you know. But it's the idea behind that is quite interesting. And then just as an example, the other day I was trying this. I took a 3D scan because you could use noises to build this stuff, but then I was thinking, why not just source actual geometry from the real world? So this is just a random 3D scan that I instanced onto a grid and rendered it top down. I took a depth pass out of that because I was thinking, why not try this? And then I was using that together with like a tool that I started developing, which is basically just a triplanar projection onto meshes to allow you to display stuff. So I did a little test with this here. So this is just a random blob. And then from that same texture, I could extrude out this, and you get this really nice faceting and folding that is kind of tricky to get with noises if you've tried, but it's kind of easy when you actually just use a scan. and I use GIMP to kind of do a seamless tile. There might be a good, there might be, if someone knows, a good way of doing that directly in COPS too. That could be cool. So this is then I baked down using a simple polar reduce and the game tools, UV, auto UV thing. And I also built my own like vector displacement thing that basically packs that into, I think Game Tools has done that now too, so it packs that down onto the UV, so you can have like a really high frequency detail, but also, you know, a low, you know what I mean, you know, whatever. You see, it's nothing new really. So here's an example again of that triplanar. And in this example, I'm just using the point relative bounding box, which just gives you a value between 0 and 1, and all a UV map is just 2 gradients. So using that and using the different coordinates, you can then project and mask using dot products to mask it. You can then create the triplanar mapping, and then here you see on the pig head extruding it out using that technique. So that's that very same texture that I generated from rendering that asset with just with random rotations and stuff. And then I remesh it using a VDB and then doing it again to add smaller details with less frequency. And that way, when you push it out one way, you can then reproject onto the other surfaces that didn't have any detail before, and you start getting the smaller frequencies. Because it's self-similar anyway. Like this sort of stuff is kind of like fractals. So here's an example of that. I did a little turntable, because why not, of Mr. Piggy. Oh yeah, so Tide, that's also, which I just showed. Do you want to see it again? We don't know if we have time for it, but yeah, this film, it was using, you can mute it a little bit. It was using a lot of COPS as well. It was kind of like kind of an interesting gateway project into folding coordinate space and working with UVs and textures and stuff, because this is all just a shader essentially we're looking at. We're just looking at a grid, a single polygon with a displacement map on it, this entire thing. But it was done using Pyro first. So I did a simple Pyro sim, which was just a straight line exploding out. And then we folded that into using a COP network that I developed to fold the coordinates essentially, which is why you get these kind of symmetry areas. We also experimented with there's a time offset thing, which if it takes a gradient grayscale value to offset time, so you could start to blend how it transitions, because at a certain point it transitions into another sim where it takes those density areas and transitions into a directional fold the shapes, and that was kind of sorry. That was kind of an interesting thing, because then you could, once you had that new form, you can then base the density on, no, I'm rambling, whatever. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So here's an example of something else I just did for this presentation too, which is just showing that folding again, but on a more, using a Manhattan noise here to get some symmetry and some more sci-fi type stuff looking. So this is kind of what the network looks for that. So it's just a simple unified noise. And I'm offsetting the coordinates for this one later on to get the movement, but it doesn't really matter. And then this is your folding of that coordinate, and then using in this case a max operation that it picks the brightest values and then filters that through. So this is just how I layer this up, and this is a very similar workflow to how you would work in Substance Designer, for example. So it's kind of cool, and then with the added ability of being able to reach out into 3D space and reach the scene and drive parameters from that. It's like, dude, we can do stuff with this. So it's pretty cool. So that's like that very same thing that we looked at a second ago, but displacing, fed into displacement, and then I'm folding that pattern to create self-similar but different patterns from that. So that's kind of how that looks, and I do everything in VOPs because I don't like typing, so, and I'm just used to. So this is like a for loop going through and altering the coordinates and then sampling the noise, and this is the result of that. And then, you know, if you displace that, then you can get that if you want to. Here's some of the other folds of that same thing. So, how much time do you have now? I just don't want to.
30 minutes.
Oh, I should slow down again. So hard to judge. But yeah, so I did a few iterations of that there just to show. But it's cool. So again, on Tide, it was a mixed bag. So it started with one sim that get folded and then time offsetted based on a gradient. That was kind of like a vignetting. So you get certain things starting to enter the dynamic mode before others. So it blends the symmetry. And then using the remapping or retiming of stuff in that was introduced in 17, you know, to kind of ramp through these areas, and then once we had a recipe, it was just a matter of changing the different folds into different patterns, and then color it differently and render it with displacement. So that was kind of how that worked out. So worked out pretty good. Another project I want to talk about, I'm just going to show this. This is going to get dark and long. I showed this last year as well, so apologies for repeating myself. But this is a project I did 2 years ago now. It's a title sequence, so let's play it. It's long, you might hate it, but I love it, so deal with it. Okay. Thank you. So that was for an event in Antwerp called Us by Night. So that's why it was a good excuse to make it really dark. And it was kind of an attempt to build a continuous, which it is, as you noticed, a continuous system that unfolds in front of your eyes and kind of mesmerizes the viewer a little bit, hopefully, anyway. And also maintaining like a high frequency detail throughout, where everything has almost infinite detail, but still having bigger primary shapes and then forming that with lighting as well to kind of highlight those. It was an experiment, and it was something that I developed for a long period of time, trying to figure out how to make them fold like this, because I was looking at, and also everything here is kind of built up of that very same system, and it was still unfolding in these shots as well. But the way I achieved, because I've tried volume-based stuff before, with the corals and everything, and it always ran out of RAM. And the way I achieved that full detail was using smaller elements and essentially instancing them with random rotations and random shaders to kind of build up a bigger surface. And this was also really efficient for rendering, because I could instance these, and all I had to deal with was the position, the orientation, sort of the matrix transforms, the scale, and which object should be instanced on top of it. And that was kind of what made up the entire surface. So for the folding and everything, this is kind of like stuff you see in nature. And I looked at a lot of this stuff because it's just beautiful and it's mesmerizing. So I think combining that with a more dark aesthetic as a representation of our journey through the creative field or whatever. It's vague ideas that I kind of post-rationalize, but it's cool. So this is essentially what's going on. So this is a simple joint chain to just explain this. So on the top one, it's just a simple rotation transform. In the middle, you have a scaled step. So this is what we have in our joints and stuff in your fingers, for example. So each one is smaller, and that gives a nice curl. And then if you then scale it as it's doing it, you can create this continuous unfold, which is what I did for Us by Night. So now I just need to figure out a way of building this, and then instancing a bunch of stuff. And then for the end, we ended up with this kind of crystal, which is kind of like a representation of the project or whatever thing you're working on, being a complete, or also kind of like a trophy. And you can see that same system being instanced all over this surface. And you can go zoom in. So this I just zoomed in really close to it, and here you can really see like the amount of detail you have there. I also developed a few other tools. This is a little bit old now, and Game Tools have done their own version of this, and this is really shit compared to that one. But this was just a scatter to kind of create islands and create UVs on surfaces. So this was something I developed for this too, because I have some other plans for the end resolve on this project initially. So this shows that, and here's an example of that on some random volume growth system. And it works really well when you have something that is quite complex like this and organic, because the UV tiles are rotated differently, and it doesn't feel like a tiling texture, and you can see it quite well here as well. Well, it's very dark, I can't say anything. But because initially I had this idea of this alien landscape, because this event was taking place at night, and I was thinking maybe it's cool if we take this space and just fill it with cables, almost to represent like the fact that it's not permanent. And so I built this thing, which is also really dark, using these kind of wires that I solved onto this volume that I grew from, I don't know how I did it, curvature and pushing VDBs around, and then I instanced these sort of folding structures onto that, almost like some sort of moss, but it's weird. Here's a moving version of that. It's out of focus. It's coming in focus now. So that's what that looked like. But when I put it into the film, I was like, it feels like too much of a departure of where we've been. So I was like, it's too alien. So I made a more realistic, natural-looking environment, which is also really dark. It's great. With like more recognizable type of rocks that you would see on Earth, but then putting these little crystals on it, and that felt better. But then in the end, I was like, it's still awkward going from that super macro detail to something that is so vast. So I ended up just making a trophy out of it and keeping it on the macro level. So all of these instances were made using the for loop and booleans. It's completely generative. So I just changed some seed values, and that cuts it differently and then combines them in a for loop to build these structures. And they all have UVs from the original source upstream, because I UV the cube. So which is cool. You know, that was enough. It worked, and you know, it's at this point I was working with geometry and not so much with texture anyway. So, well, texture too, but you know, I used geometry as the texture in a way. I also developed some stuff to kind of capture point level animation into arrays. So this was kind of like a little test where I did animate this little crystal thingy, and it subdivides the animation into 100 blend shapes in this case, and then you can export those as coordinates in an array, and then you can kind of animate that afterwards or drive it with attributes. So here's a little example of that. It's pretty cute, not really slow though, but we have time, right? We have plenty of time. 15 minutes. Wow, 15 minutes should be okay. So yeah, so I instance that, and then you have to I ran this infection system to drive the animation, and then you apply it. Come on, hurry up, Simon. This is pre-recorded, so I'm talking to myself in the past. So here you see the animation applied, but obviously now the coordinates, they're all local to that space. You need to invert the coordinates of the, I don't know if you've been dealing with matrix transforms, but it was a big part of this project, obviously, because it was folding this big structure too. But then you can place that back onto the shape with other coordinates. That's the matrix transform happening. Again, always working in VOPs. I always never write VEX code. I can, I just don't enjoy it because I always forget the lines, the words of that language. And I can get it done in VOPs anyway. So here's a little process film. So dim the lights again, enjoy, look at the detail of this, maybe? Yeah. Q. So yeah. Anyway, so I'm rounding up. We have a 10 minutes or something. So we're going to do some questions in a minute. I'm just going to go play this because it's kind of funny. So this was the project we did at Manby before, a couple of years ago now, probably. And it was for this Japanese water commercial for Elohas. So there's some of the early developments that we did. And it was about this water drop falling from the sky and then being filtered through a mountain and like carried through it, through these various fixtures. This is like Moss that was working in like a car wash to polish it and purify the water. So let me see, is this the film? Yeah, it is. So I'm just going to play it and then talk a little bit about some shots I was involved with, and then we'll go to questions.
Close your eyes, you'll be here soon. 1、2、3、4、5分時々本当に熱帯でもこのワードできない Yasumi, oh Yasumi,
Thank you. Yeah, so there was a rabbit in there. It was a kind of an interesting project. That was the only live action shot. Everything else was CG. So this is one of the shots I worked on. The dark section. They tended to give me those areas at Manby as well, so it was fun. Some more crystals. I used this was interesting. The actual drip and stuff was animated by another guy in with like some just some cubes in place for bouncing it. It was hand animated by him in Cinema, and then I brought in Alembic, and then took the cubes and then did some bulls on it to kind of create these primary forms, and then run a Verone on the inside of them to refract the light in a more interesting, slightly caustic way. I could have used the Boolean, but I like the more graphic forms that I got from the Verone, so I stuck with that. I thought it worked better, and it almost gives a sense of caustic effects, even though it doesn't actually have any caustic effects. So you can see it quite clearly if you look for it. You see that it's kind of a Verone structure inside, and then breaking up the refraction further with bump maps and stuff on the outside of it. And then I used just some noises to build up the other base. And actually, this was the first time I used COPS as well to start making textures and stuff with Houdini as well. Another shot I worked on was this one with the field of flower petals carrying it through. This was done with the wire solver and then folding geometry. I also had little pollen and stuff that was kind of being released from when they moved. You can kind of see that actually, surprisingly. You can see it on the screen. So when it reached a certain velocity, they will release and move around as well. So you can sort of see a pulse of that. And so that was quite a fast shot, but it worked out nicely. Would have been easier with vellum probably, with the strands or whatever it's called. And then I also was in charge of creating this ice environment and figuring out a way to take a drop, make it into an icicle, and explode it in less than 2 seconds, which that's how I did that. So that was also interesting. And here I took why is it moving so fast? I want to pause, but anyway. Another thing I did here was instancing little frost things on high frequency detail so I had like a high-res mesh of the mountain, and I took the really high frequency curvature of that and baked it down to a map that I then used when instancing these. So you kind of enhanced so that the frost only landed on the high frequency detail of the sculpt. That was kind of interesting. And for this part, which was like the shot just before that with the ice structure growing, it was kind of just, I don't know if I have that file to show that, but that was very simple, just scatter a point onto an existing shape, and that automatically tries to average the locations. It kind of branches naturally. And then I used the VDB curvature dot product thing to evict the VDB into a shape like this for the icicle. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? I took out the actual scene files here to explain this because I was like, there's no way I'm going to get through this. But I pushed through it too fast, so now I probably have more time than I need. But that was kind of what I wanted to show. I don't want to go into other stuff, so let's just leave it at that. We have some couple of minutes for questions if anyone has any questions. But otherwise, thanks. Thank you. All right. You had a question?
Yeah. How do you make sure to keep the geometry clean?
In what project?
Like, do you have a method? Like, do you just make everything into tries?
It depends. Like this thing that you see playing there, that's just n-gons all over the place. So it depends on what renderer you use too. Like I usually use Redshift, which for most of the stuff, and it kind of handles n-gons and weird geometry quite well. And it kind of becomes more about your Phong angle or like a normal angle and how you, and then you have like round corner shaders in there as well to take care of beveling. So generally, I would say as a rule of thumb, all my meshes are terrible, but it works. It works good enough usually, and I try to just test it. And if it's not broken, then I don't fix it. Yeah. But there are like the game tools have really good stuff too. For they've packaged up this instant meshes thing, which is really powerful. Sometimes I use that. Sometimes I just use VDBs or polyreduce. So yeah, good question, but I have no idea how to answer it. Okay, there's quite a few. Here we have one.
I want to, and first of all, absolute mesmerizing work. I love it, and the darkness,
Thank you.
Brilliant. I want to ask about the Tide project because you mentioned something that it was not totally clear for me if I understood what you did there. You said you did FumeSim first, right? And
Pyro,
then,
yeah.
PyroSim,
Yeah.
right? Sorry. The PyroSim first, and then you used comps to build this the whole thing. So did you render out the sim and then worked with the sequence, or?
So I loaded in the volume, the density data into COPS, folded that information, and animated the fold as well, so it progressed as the simulation was running through it underneath. And then I took that, a frame of that, and that became the density for another sim that then got merged with it. And then I offsetted that with a gradient, which was like back into COPS again and taking a time offset based on a grayscale gradient from the center, so you had stuff happening before while it was still forming the previous step. And then this became a displacement texture onto a polygon, essentially.
Hi. Yeah. First of all, it's amazing work. I can't like describe in words how amazing it is. Yeah, I was wondering. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really good. I was wondering, like, how did you become? Yeah, it's maybe a little bit of a hard question, but how did you become so good? Was it like mainly hard work, or are there other factors at play?
First of all, I'm not good at all.
No, you're amazing, man.
But I was working. I worked for Mammoth Machine for 8 years, and the reason I did that, it was a great company to work for. But the reason I did that was because they gave me a lot of freedom to explore and develop tools and experiment and just follow whatever I was interested in. So I basically took it as a way of just expanding and exploring everything I could, and it was very rarely that someone told me what to do. I was like, here's the problem, solve it, and I took the most elaborate way I could to solve it. And just because I knew if I get used to this level of complexity on a daily basis, then that becomes my norm.
So you just
and I can
mainly
do
think all around and just play with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And always analyzing and always trying not to get lost in technicalities. If something can be simple and look good, then that's better. So it's easy to get sidetracked and forget about the design and what you're trying to show, and it's subtleties and it's hard to explain, but you always have to feel and try to analyze why something doesn't look right. And often it comes down to your distribution of detail. You might have super detailed stuff, but it's all detailed, and you can't read it on different scales. It needs to have, primary shape, secondary, and a third level of detail. And then that can also be achieved with lighting. So it's a fully organic process, and it's hard to say where to draw the line. But it's difficult because Houdini is very fun, and you can get lost in it really easily and just focus on technical and only do technical stuff. But you can have 5 technical people that do stuff, and they're really good at what they do. Or you can have someone who's don't try to build a universe, but they build what matters and they understand why something works. So I try to remind myself of that whenever I get lost in technicalities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.